In the first section of Chapter 6, we're going to be taking a look at exponents. So in this first video, 6.1a, we're just going to introduce it, and most of it you already know, but I'm going to give you some ideas that I'm going to ask you to carry with you every time you're dealing with exponents. Okay, let's get started. How many people, when I ask my class this, how many people like rules? Oh, nobody raises their hands. Ugh, I don't like rules either. How many people like memorizing things? Oh, no, nobody likes that either. How many people like shortcuts? Oh, yeah, we all like shortcuts. The good news is, when we're dealing with exponents, rules, no, not many. Memorization, not much. We can kind of consider these two together. There are only going to be two things that I'm going to ask you to accept and just memorize. And that's it. The rest of everything that we do with exponents is going to be coming from shortcuts, and those shortcuts, we're going to learn them ourselves. We're going to discover them ourselves. Now, one more thing about the shortcuts. If in doubt, how to handle these problems that we're going to see with exponents, you can almost always go back to what exponents mean, and you all know what exponents mean, so that you can always figure it out by going back to what exponents mean. And if you can't remember the shortcut or any of the shortcuts that we're going to discover, you can always go the long way. Okay, final things, and you're going to see these two important things over and over again. The first idea is exponents are just instructions. I know they look like numbers and they even behave like numbers, but they're just instructions telling us to do something. The second point is exponents are exclusive. They only apply to what they are directly over. We've seen this before in a previous chapter. Remember these problems? Let me get rid of that. -5 quantity squared versus -5, the -5 squared. So we'll talk about that in a second. So this final idea that exponents are exclusive, every time you're confronted with an expression with exponents, ask yourself, what does this exponent apply to? That's going to be the most useful advice I can give on exponents. Okay, well, let's talk about this -5 and the squared and all of that before we go on. We've seen this before, so let's go back. This has to do with exponents being exclusive, and what does this exponent apply to? So in this first case, we see, here's the little exponent up here, the 2. Who does that exponent apply to? Okay, it applies to the whole -5, and how do we know it? Because we have these parentheses. So that means this 2, this instruction up here, tells us to do something to the whole thing -5. And what does it mean, that little exponent? It means to take whatever it applies to, and it applies to the -5, and multiply it times itself 2 times. And that's what we've just done, and we would get as an answer a positive 25. So is this sounding familiar? Okay, in the second case, we've got a -5 squared. Who does that exponent to apply to? It's just sitting right on the 5, so it only applies to that 5. So I'm going to put a circle around that. That only applies to the 2 only applies to the 5. So we would say, okay, 5 squared is 5 times 5. Let me go ahead and write that. 5 squared is 5 times 5, but this little negative is still out front, and we can either see that as a -5 times a +5, or a negative times a 5 times 5, and either way we're going to get a -25. Okay, so remember that from before. Alright, that's going to be a big deal every time. And keep in mind, exponents are just instructions, and you got to ask, who they apply to. Okay, let's do one more introduction, then we're going to go into discovering our shortcuts. Oh, come back. You already know this. I see a number, and I see a little number on its shoulder, the 5, the exponent. So what does that mean? In other words, what are the instructions that this exponent is telling us to do? Well, it's telling us to take this number 3 and multiply it times itself. How many times? 5 times. I think I got that. Okay, so we're multiplying 3 times itself 5 times. So we've done the instruction. One thing I want to point out, that's just the instruction. When we actually do what it's telling us to do you see the 5 anywhere in there? No, it's just the number of times you multiply. It's just the instruction. And I think that we get 343 when we multiply that. I'm not sure about that. Okay, next. When you have, let's go back to 3 to the 5th power. We already know that this little guy up here, our instruction, that number is the exponent. You already know that. Do you remember, or have you ever known what the big number that exponent applies to is called? Okay, that is called the base. Okay, so before we leave here, I've just got to figure this out. I know that 3/4 is 81, so 3 to the 5th would be, ooh, I was off. It's 243. So let me just change that so that I'm telling you any lies. We get 243. And also, what I'm kind of interested in here, we're going to be working with exponents, so we're just going to be dealing with things like, oh, that's interesting. 3 to the 5th. Right now, I'm just going to leave all of my answers as a number with an exponent. Later, we will chunka, figure out what that equals, and we also may remind ourselves what that exponent means. But to be honest, see this 343, we're not going to be interested in figuring that out because I'm assuming you can do that. So we're going to concentrate on exponents. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.